So good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to today's discussion. We're going to be starting momentarily, so make sure you have your coffee, make sure you're seated comfortably, and we're going to be started in just 1 minute. There's quite a few just joining now. And what I'd like you to do, just to give you an expectation of what we're going to be running today's session, is if you could let me know in the chat, where in the world are you joining from today? So if you could please let us know where in the world are you joining today? And the reason why I'm asking is today's session is about you. We've designed an experience all around yourselves. So we want to ensure that you get value out of that. And to do so, you're going to have to ask questions so that our panelists will be able to give you some new insights. So I'm going to kick off, and you can use the chat function already. We've got a Q&A in, so thank you so much. So I'll let you know I'm joining from Northern Ireland, and if you could let me know in the chat, where are you joining from today, and we'll get started. And the other thing is we're going to run a poll just as we start today's session as well, just to kind of throw out what are your key priorities around customer centricity for the year ahead. So we will get that underway as well. It looks like chat is disabled. So Gary, thank you so much for that. And let's see what we can do there. So bear with me. Okay, so even if you could use the Q&A and if you just let me know, and Gary, if you could let me know where in the world you're joining from today, and there we go. Chris in Scottsdale, you're very welcome. We have Mr. Reed in Barcelona in Spain. We've got Tyler in Twin Falls, Alan in Los Angeles. So you're all very welcome. And I'm really glad that you're able to use the Q&A, because today is a two-way conversation between yourselves and our special guest today. So before I open today's session, I'm just going to welcome you all. So today's session is to help you understand what are the top ways in which you can better understand your customers. And no better way to do that is to bring together some of the world's foremost thinkers. We've got the book in front of me, fresh, hot from the press. And the speakers today, we've got Alex Genov. Alex is a really good friend of mine. He's currently the head of customer experience at Zappos. He has a background in psychology, and one of the foremost thinkers around how can you infuse customer centricity by understanding your customers. Also got one of the leading thinkers in brand strategy, Fernando, and he's advised global companies all over the world, including Coca-Cola and Porsche, Amazon, and Zappos, around infusing emotion and creating a customer-centric approach to design. And we're going to be joined shortly by our third panelist, who is advising companies like Google and others all around the techniques from a research perspective to understand your customers. So as we're getting started, we've got others. We've got our first from Cambridge in the UK. Vanessa, you're very welcome. You're joined by Gary in Cheshire in the UK as well. So you're all very welcome. Very diverse audience. Peter from Amsterdam as well. And Alistair Spence from East Belfast. We'll say no more. So you're all very welcome. And I would just like to just open up with just the agenda before we get into the discussion. So our goal today is really to help you if you're thinking about customer centricity and you've started your journey. Today's all about giving you a boost. So you'll have the key kickstart to really think about and take the principles that you're going to learn today's session into your day-to-day practice. And if you haven't, don't worry, you're going to get the step-by-step guide and the toolbox to enable you to think about how you can really make a difference by thinking about your customer and putting them first in how you design the experience. And the great news for you is that if you stay to the end of today's session, you're going to get a present. So everyone's going to get access to a present, and for every attendee, we're giving 10 copies of today's book away. So we're offering 10 people an exclusive copy of the book, Forget the Customer, See the Person. And we're joined today by the 3 authors. And the second gift is you're going to get a customer experience health check, where we're going to give you 3 insights around the emotional drivers for your current customer experience. We might even benchmark that to Zappos, just to give you some context. So just by way of introduction, my name is Chris Johnston. I'm the CEO of Adoreboard. Just going to give you a bit of context to why we're here today from an Adoreboard perspective, and then we'll go straight into the session. So at Adoreboard, we quantify human emotion. We turn that into what we call decision-ready insights. And then our customers like Procter & Gamble, Allstate, then use that to create better business outcomes. And this idea that we'll talk about today is this notion of what are the decisions that you can make to improve the human experience. And human experience is all the touch points around the customer and employee experience. And you're going to hear from Alex and Fernando about the importance of emotion and really understanding about that. Today's session, you'll also hear about AI and the notion that AI is almost intelligent, and you'll hear me talking about small data and the value of really taking what typically is a sample of your customers, usually through your NPS, to understand the drivers. And how we do that is we're able to analyze 1,000 comments in under 30 seconds. We automatically understand the key drivers, and then we link that to an emotional intensity. And then our AI is able to write the presentation to then give you an overall performance. And then for Starbucks, we're able to predict if they understand the drivers, such as people hate waiting in the Starbucks queues, they want to use their mobile phone. It looks like people aren't happy with that. It's driving more sadness compared to any other issue. And if they were to fix that, that would drive their net promoter score by 1%. So that's just to give you a bit of context. And you'll hear me talk about the value of emotion. And the reason why we think about emotion is that 80% of your customers' decisions are driven how they feel. We're going to ask today's session to Alex to open up around this idea, the big idea around thinking about your customers as people, not as numbers. And this is the key central point. We happen to use a model called Plutchik's wheel, and there's a way to kind of quantify human intensity like trust. We turn that into a really simple framework called 3 steps to decision-ready insights. So you want to take all the data around the experience. You want to understand and prioritize the key drivers based on customer emotion. And then you want to turn that into business decisions. So I thought for today's session, what does good look like? So we're going to look at Zappos. So I've taken some analysis of Zappos just to give you a flavor of what that looks like in terms of just framing today's conversation. So I've taken small data, not big data, 240 comments from reviews of Zappos. You can see that we give on an index of -100 to +100, what's known as an Adore score. And you can see the score is very good, the +47 with the key emotion of joy. We're able to then correlate key emotions that are being expressed in the unstructured text data to key emotions. So you can see that trust is strongly correlated with their employee rating. And you can see that community culture, customer service, and training all are key pillars for the Zappos culture, and they're all driving the key emotion of joy. And you can see if they were to improve that, that would drive their employee engagement by a range of percentages. And you can see if you're then to look at the key drivers, you can see the community culture right through to the free food and the drivers and the predictions. And then you can see the key commentary coming through there. So you can see people talking about the experience. Isn't that amazing that how their employees describe serving their customers is like being on the phone talking to an old friend, which is pretty amazing. And then if we're then to compare that to their customer experience, Zappos is legendary around their free shipping, and you can see that's driving joy and trust. And if you're then to compare that to their employee experience, so you can see designing the triggers we'll hear about. So you can see people talking about the awesome culture. And I love this quote: "A typical workday would be starting the morning by checking my emails and greeting my wonderful team." You can see in the second comment, the typical day I come to the cafe and eat breakfast, then clocking in, I start my safety audits to make sure the building is in perfect condition. My main job is to perform awesome customer service and positive attitude. Isn't that's just phenomenal? You know, someone's job whose health and safety is thinking about the customer. And you can see how aligned the Zappos customer experience is to their employee experience. You can see that they're very aligned when it comes to trust and joy. And you can see the core indicators that are driving surprise, trust, and joy right through that. So that was just a bit of framing. So without further ado, we'll kick off. So I'm going to start off while we're doing the introduction. So Alex, if you maybe just give us a quick introduction, and Fernando, and then we're also, just while you're doing that, we're going to launch the poll there just to understand what are the key priorities for your customer experience this year, and we'll use that at the end to inform the Q&A. So Alex, just if you would just give us an overview of your experience as Fernando as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. Very high level. I'm heading the customer experience research team at Zappos. That's a very capable team that really works together with other teams, like, for example, the data scientists and analytics folks, to inform the organization about customers as people. And that's kind of the big idea that we'll be talking about. And yeah, I've been fortunate to be Chris's friend for years now.
Superb. And Fernando, you have the link because you also worked in Zappos as well. So I know you've now started your own organization around storytelling, but it would be good just to get a high level view as well.
Yeah, I was a creative director at Zappos. I used to work on company employee engagement. So culture and internal culture and some external stuff. That's when I met Alex, and then we became friends, and then we started just working together, and we share this passion for the customer experience and the brand experience. So that's how kind of the book came to be. And yeah, I'm personally very passionate about the emotional connection that brands and owners can build with their customers and their employees. So I created a company now that is focused on advising business owners on creating that kind of emotional connection.
That's fantastic. And I suppose the book nicely ties those key elements together, you know, and I think, Alex, if you could start us off with the big idea that really underpins everything with the book, and we'll maybe start there.
Absolutely, Chris. Before I do that, I want to give a little bit of background of why it's such a fantastic fit to be, you know, hosted by Adoreboard. And here's my little story, which is I've done many talks over the years, went all over the world, but my most memorable one is the one hosted by Chris, and I'll tell you why. Because Chris invited me to Belfast, and I went there, and on the vast majority, 90% of my talks, I am on my own, and you know, I do my talk, and I never get you know, involved or never get hosted, if you will. But Chris provided a fantastic experience for me. He was like a friend from the get-go. He provided a fantastic, he was a tour guide, and he was, he showed me around, and we went. We had beer in this amazing pub in Belfast. I remember this now for years, and I'm telling people about this. So why am I saying that? Because Chris understands. Well, in addition to being a brilliant mind and a great CEO, and who has to have grit, and the founder and so on, Chris is a fantastic human being, and that's what we're talking about. It's you need, and that translates into the product he's building and the company he's building. And we're not here to sell the book or sell Adoreboard, really. We're here to talk about the big idea, but I wanted to set the stage for that, because business is as much about humans as it is about numbers. And our big idea is this realization that, nowadays there's this mega trend of companies being obsessed with big data and analytics and algorithms. That's one of those mega trends. And on the other hand, companies like Chris and Fernando said, they want to create emotional connection with consumers. They talk about the importance of emotion, of design, of customer experience, customer service. But if you think about it, those two trends are in opposition to one another, and they create this tension. And the big idea is that any company that wants to create long-time, customers and loyal customers for years, any company has to resolve this tension and has to create this balance between looking at just the numbers and understanding their customers as human beings, because you cannot really average human experience, right? I don't know if you've heard the story of the statistician who had his head in a hot oven and feet in a block of ice, but on the average, they felt just fine. I can do a whole hour of stand-up comedy on what happens when you try to average human experience. But I think that's the big idea, and I'm super excited to share some thoughts with you.
Superb. And maybe the difference between product experience and customer experience, and one of our questions coming there from the audience, Barbara, is really defining that idea of customer centricity. So maybe, Alex, if you could maybe just unfold that big idea, which is understanding your customers as people, as a link to the business outcome of that idea of customer centricity.
Absolutely, Chris, and that's one of the main main parts of the book, that we do elaborate on this difference between product centricity and customer centricity, and it's based on the teachings of really the godfather of customer centricity in the U.S., Professor Peter Fader from the Wharton School. And he talks about companies that are absolutely excellent companies, very successful companies that really don't need to be customer centric. So companies like Apple, and he gives example of Nordstrom and other companies. In his definition, they're product centric in the sense that they create the best products out there that competitors cannot match. And they are operationally excellent, so they achieve these great prices for their customers because they can achieve these savings at scale and so on. So these companies really don't need to understand to do market segmentation or to really cater to different subsegments of their customer base. They need to really inform everybody out there about the great products and services, and they're going to grow. But the point is that nowadays things are changing, and consumers have a lot of information, and our world is globalized and business is globalized. And nowadays it's much more difficult to start a business and be the Apple and be the Nordstrom and be the Ford and so on. So the point there is now companies have a much better chance of creating a growing loyal customer base by being customer centric, which means, in a nutshell, understanding that not all their customers are the same. They need to understand their different subsegments of their customers, not only demographically, but also in terms of their attitudes and in terms of their emotions, if you will, goals, apprehensions, fears, hopes, and so on. And when they understand those customers, they'll actually see that some customer groups are much better fit for their business than others. And then it's a business decision, of course, to figure out which customer groups to go after and to cater to, and to provide, of course, great customer service to everybody, but go above and beyond only the groups of customers that will bring them the most business and the most profit in the long run.
Superb, and that's a beautiful segue into segmentation, because I see that James has joined us. Welcome, James, and we'll maybe do a quick introduction to you just as we fold that on. But I think whilst James is collecting his thoughts, maybe if you could just center it on that idea of the value of emotion and the idea that you can't design an experience. So an experience happens, and the idea of then emotion being the at the forefront of that.
Is that question for me or for?
Yes, if you could, Alex, just to tee
Oh, yeah,
up.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, Chris. Yeah, this is another thing that we expand on in the book, which is a little bit of more of a thought-provoking. So the book has two parts to it. One is thought-provoking, more of an inspirational aspect, intended to change minds and to have people look at things in a different way. And then the second part is more practical, and that's where James has contributed to the know-how of how you do market segmentation and so on. But to this idea that you cannot, we have a chapter called "You Cannot Design Experience," and this comes from our understanding of human psychology, which is experience, strictly speaking, is an emotion, and you cannot technically create an emotion in another person, a human being, because emotion is an emergent property of that person and the situation. And so an example is, if you, speaking of employee experience, now there's a lot of talk about how in the past, forced company parties were, that was something that was imposed on employees, and some of them did not want to participate, for example, right? And so if you get somebody in a party and have them participate, you don't necessarily expect them to be happy or to be joyful at that point. It's only if the person is in the right mood, in the right mindset, if the situation is right, the combination of those two creates what we consider an experience. Companies can make great products and provide great services. And if there is a good match between those products and services and the human being, the customer, then you can have this like a positive experience. I think that hopefully that clarified it a little bit.
Superb. And I suppose that tees up nicely. We've started with the big idea, the idea of treat your customers as people, not as numbers. So how do you do that? And obviously we have James, and James is a doctorate in psychology. He advises companies like Google, Microsoft, and a number of others with his company called Unabashed Research. And James, from your perspective, when we discussed, you talked about the idea in the book of not being able to average an experience, and the whole idea of really trying to get to understand your customers and the techniques on how you can actually do that. We talked just before today about this idea of getting a customer personality test as a way into thinking about segmentation. And I would just like you to maybe just open up that whole idea of segmentation. What is the good approaches to that, and then just maybe some of the steps that people listening today can take.
Yeah, for sure. So what we talked about before is that there's no like one size fits all solution for segmentation research, but Alex and I stumbled upon this approach like over a decade ago, and it seems to work really well for a couple of reasons. And that approach is what we call psychographic segmentation. Right. So the idea is that start off at the big picture. First, you have a company. You have the way that you view your company. Does that really match up with the way users out there, customers out there feel about your company? Because you want to find customers that view your company the same way you do. At the end of the day, what we're talking about here is business. And I like to think of it as a symbiotic relationship between your business and your customers. You're providing added value to them, they're providing added value to you, right? You're in this relationship where they like what you're making and so much that they're gonna pay for it less than it costs you to make it. So you got to find those people that you really have that good symbiotic relationship with, and that in a nutshell is what segmentation research is about. So first, you want to make sure that you're targeting customers that have the same vision as your company does. And then a little bit more detailed than that is you really want to define or design this personality test around your core product space. And this starts off with a lot of interviews, actually going out, talking to your customers, talking to people that are potential customers. They aren't customers yet, but you want to find out why. And then you're going to build all these attitudinal and behavioral questions to kind of cover all the types of people that might consider your product, and maybe even those that don't. Once you have that, you're respecting each customer's individuality and individual differences, because once you have 30 to 40 different psychological questions about their attitudes, beliefs around your product space, you know, it's like 1 in 10 billion that someone else is going to answer this the exact same way by chance, right? But importantly, once you have that personality test, then you can start to, and I think we'll lead into this, we'll pass it off, but once you have that, then you can start designing personas around what types of customers are in your product space, and really identify those types of people, those groups of individuals that really resonate with the added value you're trying to offer the market, and they're really going to be drawn into the product that you're offering. And I think that might be a segue to.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic, James. And I think what I was struck in the book is this whole idea of it being a journey. So you're actually going into you know, suspending any confirmation biases in terms of suspending your you know, hypothesis, really framing about what could be rather than predetermining. And I was struck by what you said at the start, which is all of this inquiry around trying to find the ideal customer, the highest value segment, is to drive the business forward, and that idea of being a journey. And you've just beautifully summarized the fact that you're trying to get these segments around personalities, around that idea of clustering, which we talked about. And I think this lovely segue into Fernando, because at this point you're then starting to potentially develop high-level specifications, designs to even bring that into a process. So it's this whole idea of building a narrative that then feeds into brand strategy. So maybe Fernando, if that's a nice segue into linking that key thought.
Yeah, yeah, this is great. I think it really matters that you have this data and it's actually like accurate. You understand your customer, right? Because every company, no matter the size, has limited resources, and I think it's important to use those resources like in an efficient way, in an effective way, that you can truly engage with your customers in a way that leads to business, like what they care about and what you care about. When there's the overlap, that's how you connect, and that's how you build this loyalty and these like true fans, which is really what we're going after. In my case, like when we're talking about like design and the brand exposure or the brand experience, if you will, like it's important to have all these insights, because that gives us like really clear pointers into like where to go. Like if your customer, we talked about, it's like if your customer likes loud music, then you don't go like all zen and and calm and quiet. Like you go and cater to them in the way they understand, they like, they care. So that's how all those things are really connected, right? Like once you have the data, like it needs to materialize in tangible outcomes that they can feel, if you will, or understand in a emotional way.
And I love the idea that we discussed, which is that, you know, you're starting with a big idea, which you know, Alex has outlined, you know, thinking about your customers as people. Well, how do you do that? You do the clustering and segmentation. You then have to zoom back out to then think about brand strategy. And I was quite struck that we didn't get to the customer experience part straight away. That actually, you know, there was a couple of really practical steps that you taught me through. You know, the 3 or 4 steps around really getting in depth in the understanding of the customer, thinking about the triggers, how you design those triggers, and then align that into the world that you're creating. So could you maybe just kind of unfold that for the audience, just in terms of that key idea?
Yeah, kind of like the cadence was kind of like that, right? Like you first go into like the numbers, the data, and then understand the customer. And then from there, you start understanding what part of your site overlaps, and then you create those little triggers that you're talking about, right? So you cater to this emotional side of your customer, to the your customer's memories, right? Like we talked about, like childhood memories, or like something that's kind of like overall a trigger that will elicit an emotion. And that once you have that emotion, you can essentially talk them into anything or sell them whatever service you provide. Using the Zappos example, we used to create these big parties for our vendors and our employees. And we came up with a theme that kind of like appealed to a lot of them. Like we had a lot of information on customers, but also we have on employees, right? Like there's this like deep engagement with them. So we understand the things they like, they don't like. And then we started creating this save the date, right? So using the example of the party, we created save the date first. That has like little hints of like, this is going to be a tropical theme or a dreamy theme, or this is going to be like, I don't know, 1900s Paris or something like that. And then you start getting people excited, and then you start getting them thinking about like, oh, what are they going to wear? Who are they going to go with? Like, how are they going to do their hair? And then they start like doing their own, like looking up their own outfits and whatnot. So that's kind of like one of the triggers. And once we get to that point, then we actually send them an invite that has like a little more details. And then they start thinking like, oh, what am I going to do with like my kids or my blah, like, am I going to meet my friends before? And the idea is like to start getting them slowly into this parallel universe, if you will. Like it's like an alternative world that we bring them into. And once they're there, the idea is to just create this world that is just so coherent, consistent, that the experience that they, as Alex said, like we cannot design experience, but their experience is just kind of like set up for success because we created all the triggers and the steps and the little things ahead.
Superb. And it's really and I know Alex is keen to put in, I just maybe reinforce this just before we bring in Alex, that idea that you can't design the experience, but you can set out the canvas and the framework for how the experience can come to life, right? So, and brands do that. Your example in the book of Starbucks, for example, about elevating social status. Maybe you could give that example, and then Alex, just jump in with further thought.
Yeah, I think the example that we talk about in the book about Starbucks is like, what does Starbucks really give you? Like for some people it's actually coffee, but for some people it's social interaction. For some people it's status, right? Like going to Starbucks versus a different coffee shop, it gives them a different kind of social positioning, if you will. And Starbucks provides that to them but then they create all the necessary like pieces to create this scenario. Like so they do have the drinks, the space, the well-crafted design, the packaging, like the customer service, like everything is crafted. So no matter what you're looking for, the experience is a good experience for you.
Superb. Alex?
And just to bring an example, and I mean, I love everything that, you know, James and Fernando said, just to bring an example to give an example, to bring that to life. So here's an example of different mindsets that James talked about understanding and segmenting on. And this is an example from, for example, from my personal example, personal, you know, family interactions. It's about gaming. So we have two boys, and they're avid gamers, you know, 10 and 11, and they do Fortnite and all these games, right? And so what we end up spending a lot of money on is what's called you know, skins, or just these outfits that are virtual outfits that I initially was telling my kids, like, this is a totally stupid thing, like we're wasting money, right? But to them, they're like, no, that's what makes the experience for me. And I cannot understand that, but I gave up on trying to lecture them on that, and I keep spending the money. But the companies now, they've understood that they have a segment that for that segment, this makes or breaks the experience. If I was playing, I would not spend a cent on that. But I think that's a great example of and that's the emotional trigger, and that's an example of another thing that Fernando pointed out, which is the emotion of anticipation. I think that there isn't a lot of talk about it in when we design products and services and so on. Anticipation, right? And so Fernando gave a beautiful example of how you do that with, let's say, an upcoming event. But even in Fortnite, they start giving little hints about the new skin and so on, and so the anticipation builds and builds. I mean, this is very applicable to retail, to other, you know, of course, the entertainment industry, they understand that very well. So they've designed a lot of triggers for that. Just wanted to give that to give an example of the different mindsets.
And I think maybe, James, from your perspective, you know, just to you know, go back into that it's the importance of segmentation and some of the ways that you can do that through focus groups and some other techniques. So I suppose the key thing is, rather than jump to the design of the experience, you have to go deep to really understand that. Is there any kind of additional commentary there when thinking about some of the practical steps of ultimately you're wanting to generate insights that are then going to trigger up some of that context for then thinking about how you think about the actual brand strategy?
Yeah, it's hard to get into specifics because every segmentation project is different. What you're trying to do when you're interviewing, when you're like doing focus groups or the in-depth interviews, to actually get the qualitative information you need to design the segmentation survey in the first place. What you're trying to learn is just to cover the breadth of attitudes, beliefs, opinions, behaviors that describes your product space. So really, like, piggybacking off of Alex's example, if I was doing a segmentation project for Fortnite, it would look completely different than piggybacking off of Fernando, the segmentation study for Starbucks customers or coffee customers. The types of questions I'd be asking would be completely different. For Fernando, for Starbucks, you would want to maybe get at status a little bit more. If, like, it's important to me to be seen with a $5 cup of coffee instead of my aluminum thermos that I got out of my kitchen, right? For Fortnite, you know, you're going to want to definitely get to, you know, when I'm online, I like to show my personal expression. You're trying to find customers that have attitudes and beliefs around being able to customize not just their own personal experience, but how they look to others. So you really have to understand your product space. You really have to understand your product. You have to think about what is the value add, the value proposition of my product itself, but also really understand it from the customer's point of view, what they're getting out of it, what they think the value add is, so that when you're designing your quote unquote personality test, you can really cover as many aspects of that user experience as possible.
Super.
Collect your data.
Super. And Fernando, it's when you get that information, you talked about the idea of people by emotion, and really what you're trying to do is to identify the triggers of the ideal experience. And I obviously asked you, what was the key takeaway from working at Zappos and observing Tony Hsieh in terms of understanding what the key idea was that was imparted to the teams. And you were saying about thinking about the end experience first, the dream scenario, and then working backwards. And in our discussion, you provided really practical steps, how you unfold that. You talked about the need not to go super technical whilst you've got all this data, to kind of use that in a way that takes that information that then creates triggers to then understand how the audience responds. Could you maybe talk a bit more about how those threads come together to then allow you to arrive at what that looks like in terms of implementing that from a customer experience approach?
Yeah, I think what we were talking about was that really, if you understand your customer and you understand what they care about, it's not about shoes, it's not about like coffee, it's not about the game, it's about like how they feel in the end, right? Like, do they feel happy? Do they feel satisfied? Do they feel like proud or joyful, whatever it is that they're looking for? Like, that's what we're going after. And Tony used to use this phrase that was like, Zappos is a customer service company that happens to sell shoes, but he was all about the great customer service and the customer being happy after interacting with the company. So he, in his mind, like, Zappos could have sold anything, and customers really cared about like being listened to and being cared about and cared for. So as a practical example, I think, and kind of like tying it back to what James said, like, everyone wants something different and in every case is different. But in our example with the parties, like, we knew that there were people that wanted to just like drink and have a great time drinking, but some people wanted to dance, and some people wanted to just chill and like sit with their friends and colleagues and customers. And the idea is that we look at what they want, which is like, they just want to have a good time, be appreciated, and then we create the little experiences, well, not experiences, the little like scenarios, the little setups, so everyone can like feel like they get the best out of the event, but ultimately they all had a great time, right? So for some, a great time is like getting as drunk as possible. For some, a great time is like drinking, dancing as much as possible. For some, a great time is just like spending the night out with friends. And we created the space for all of them to like just expand. But again, we start from the end and we're like, okay, what does a great time mean? And then we go backwards and we're like, okay, for some means this, for some means this, for some means this. And then we start building from there.
Yes, and James, I know this is a great opportunity for you to then reflect on the segments about how that relates. So I would love to get your contribution.
Well, mainly I just wanted to so it's really it's kind of hard to do research without bringing in your own bias. And I just wanted to call myself out, because even the examples we gave before about, how might you design a segmentation around Fortnite users? Like, I brought in my bias that maybe it's about creative expression. Maybe it's about, designing the way you look to other people in Fortnite, right? Ideally, that might be in the back of your head, but it isn't until you actually sit down with Fortnite users and you're like, why do you buy skins? Like, what are you getting out of it? And even that might be too premature. Maybe you start off like even more general, and you just watch them, observe how they play Fortnite. And then you notice that, oh, wow, they're spending money on skins. So maybe that's a follow-up question. You do a deep dive into that a little bit. It's trying to understand their entire experience. If, it's Fernando, like Fernando's example, you asked him about the parties. What are you getting out of the party? Are you getting the dancing out of it? Are you getting the drinking out of it? Are you getting the socialization out of it, right? So you start there, just completely open-ended, completely open-minded, try to understand what they're getting out of the experience. And then you can use that to, for example, wow, everyone's talking about how they love the creative expression in Fortnite. So, okay, we definitely need to include in our personality test something about creative expression. If you're asking about parties and everyone's like, oh man, yeah, absolutely love the dancing. Well, then you definitely have to include attitudinal questions about dancing in your segmentation survey. So the first step has always got to be go out, talk to real people, as many as you need to understand like the mind of the customer. Sounds easy. Once you have that, then you can start to design the segmentation survey around that to cover the breadth of the kind of attitudes and opinions that you're hearing over and over again in the in-depth interviews and the focus groups.
Superb. And I know Fernando is keen to build on that. And what I would say is that, by intimately understanding the customer, and I would love Fernando to talk about this, is this idea of trust and the role of trust, enabling an experience to happen. So by understanding the customer so intimately and then setting out the context for the experience to happen, can you just talk us through that and build on your thought from what James is saying?
Yeah, for sure. I just wanted to piggyback of what James said, because the parties that we were creating, it was definitely an evolution, right? We started with just your typical party where you would get food and drinks and hire a venue. And then we started asking people, okay, what do you like about it? What do you not like about it? And then it started evolving into a very specific format of party where there was a specific type of venue. There was always a theme that was very clear. There was always performers and whatnot, and we kind of narrow it down to what people truly cared about. And I think the trust part comes in at some point. You can somewhat, it's easier for you to put resources into this product, because you know that people do trust that you're gonna give them what you promised, which is a good time, right? And you promise this great time with their friends, with their vendors and whatnot, and they know that they'll get it. So that's when the trust comes in. When you start listening and then delivering, and then listening again, delivering, that's when you build the trust, because trust is ultimately the ultimate currency, right? If you don't have the trust, they won't come to you, they won't come back to you. So it's the trust that now you will get what the company, what the service provider promised, and you know that your money is safe, your time is safe, and everyone's just happy, right?
I just want to build on that, because I was personally part of those experiences, those fantastic parties that Fernando built. And I mean, Tony Shea was a big part behind that. But I want to bring another aspect, which is in addition to trust, which is guts. Have the company understanding their customers, understanding internal or external, understanding the employees, but then having the guts to make these decisions that are counterintuitive. So to build on what Fernando was saying, it was as important deciding on what not to do. So here's an example. There was no food at the Zappos parties, right? And you would think that that's crazy, but no, it actually makes sense because the standard way of thinking is you have to have food. So what happens then is you have a lot of people there in a small space, a relatively small space. Then you have to have these few carts with food, and what happens is these long lines, and so the people that are lined up to get food that are absolutely miserable waiting to get like a piece of hamburger or something, right? And that's how they spend their time, waiting in line and being miserable. Instead, Zappos is saying, you know what, we're going to give you drinks and alcohol, and then eat before you come, and then you're not going to wait in lines. And here's an example of how you design the setup, and then when you get rid of frustration, you get rid of anger, because you do something counterintuitive.
Yeah, and what I was trying to illustrate by the back and forth with Fernando and James is actually the idea of process here, because I think that if you don't go through the research process to then inform another thought, of the design process and all the rest, I think that's key. So it's not a one-off, one-hit wonder. It informs and it evolves, and you're constantly learning. And maybe bring it back, and maybe Fernando, if you want to build on that, please jump in. But maybe bring it back into, I asked the question at the start of the session, what are their biggest challenges around the customer experience in this coming year? And interestingly, people are boiling it back to understanding the drivers of NPS. So we've talked about, the broad aspirational view of, design the dream experience, and add in limitations as you think through that. But most people, and certainly the audience today, are viewing their customers in an Excel, a row captured in an NPS survey. Could you maybe talk through how people could evolve that, Alex, just in terms of the context of even bringing forward initiatives in their companies and building business cases for that, and linking the drivers of NPS to actually making an improvement, with your original big idea that we shouldn't be obsessing about the NPS number and boiling it down to a single digit.
Is that a question for me, Chris?
Sure is.
Yeah, sure. No, great question. I mean, this is, again, bringing it back to what you do with Adoreboard, which is you started by explaining that you gather the numbers, but you also gather the emotion and you gather the context, right? And I think it's very important to understand the difference between the Net Promoter Score and then customer sentiment. And this is what we started a very successful voice of the customer program at Zappos. But along the way, I had to educate executives even to say, what is the difference between NPS and customer sentiment? And companies like Adoreboard, for example, you measure both, and it's important to understand the difference. So somebody can give you on the question, how likely you to recommend company, let's say Zappos, to a friend or family member, you can give a 10, very high Net Promoter Score. So you're a loyal customer, you recommend. But during maybe some interaction with the company have left you disappointed. So you give feedback and you say, I love Zappos, but I've been a customer for years, but your checkout sucks, let's say, or something like that. I cannot check out. So then a company like Adoreboard would say, this is a promoter that is unhappy. And I think that's the insight. And then it's up to the company to decide whether to, because somebody may say, give you a 0 to Net Promoter Score and say, I hate this company, don't buy from this company because XYZ. So as a company, you have to decide, do you want to take the really unhappy customers and spend resources to convert them back or make them happy again. Maybe you want to do that, or you want to keep your really loyal customers happy. That's a business decision. But I think that's the difference between, you have to collect both. You have to understand who's, and Net Promoter is not a perfect measure, as there's no perfect measure, but it gives you a sense of who likes your company. And that was what James was saying, the fit between, you know, like the attitude towards the company and what the company does. But then you track all this through time, and that's another thing we talk about in the book. You need to measure this, take an individual and measure their emotions through time and keep that record and observe. Maybe they're a loyal customer and they give you a 10, and then they give you 10 pieces of feedback, and then you don't do anything about it. And then on the 10th, they score you 5 instead of 10. And now they're starting telling people, actually, you know what, forget about this company.
Yeah, that's a really good illustration of that. I suppose maybe I'm bringing in the questions. You've been great on the Q&A. Barbara, thank you so much. Alan as well. And you saw Alex was busily typing answers. So hopefully that has illuminated some of your questions there. But please use the Q&A to ask questions as well. Maybe just pause there just to kind of reinforce that you know, this book is out now. We've got 10 copies to give. You're going to hear from some of my colleagues with an Irish accent or Northern Irish accent, phoning up and letting you know who's the winner of that. So stay tuned. You might get the call in the coming hour. I suppose the final thought is that we're offering 3 insights complimentary to help you start your customer-centric journey. I suppose, please, on the Q&A, any other questions, please let us know. But maybe a concluding thought. So, you know, you've set up, you've bought into the idea of customer centricity. You've started your research program to understand your segments, zooming out on your personas, selecting your persona, and then testing that with your design. You've then thought about the brand strategy and then put that into living that out through the CX tactics. Zappos is famous for a customer-centric culture, so how the culture supports that, and the famous notion of delivering wow. Do you have a favorite example of that from Zappos or other brands that you've all advising global brands who also claim to be customer-centric, that would maybe illuminate the importance of culture and that broader you know, focus on the value of customer centricity? And I'll put that out. I would love all 3 to contribute.
Go ahead, guys. I'll let you chime in.
Well, I can use Zappos examples. James, do you have an example?
I've
said
never
you
worked for Zappos.
No, I did. I think, I mean, there's plenty of examples at Zappos, right? Like there's all the examples of like people that like maybe lost a family member or had like a hard time, so they send them like flowers with a handwritten note, and I think the point here is like, for sure they make it like free shoes or cookies or flowers, but it really is the thought, like how they made them feel. Like, and that's my opinion. Like I was on the phone once because we all had to get on the phones for during the holidays, which it was actually one of my favorite times. I was on the phone and there was this customer who, and they were living on vacation and their boots were not arriving on time, and it was the last pair. And through asking like the people in charge, because I was not knowledgeable, I was like, so what can I do to help them? And they will go like the extra mile to help them. And it's like, so find the boots like where they're at, and then send them like credit for whatever boots they had. And then they went to a different store to buy the boots that with money that we sent them. And it's like, because truly what they care about is them having a good time with their boots and not so much about us making the sale. Of course, it's a for-profit, right? So that's all baked into the model, but I believe that this is a customer for life, right? Like this is the customer that will like talk about you positively in front of like friends, customer, colleagues. This is the customer that will defend you, and that's just as worth. I don't want to talk about numbers. That's not my thing, but it's probably worth a lot more than the customer that just gets some free product for just to appease them, kind of thing.
Yes, I'm smiling because the fact that the company says, "Hey, Fernando, go and spend time speaking to your customers," and affording you the opportunity to do that, and then you've been able to respond in that way. So that's golden. Thank you so much. James or Alex, do you want to build on that?
Go ahead, James.
I got nothing.
I mean, I'll chime in with another just along those lines of customer service. And I answered one of the questions in the chat. It's really through our research and through using technology, like for example, like Adoreboard, right, to listen to what our customers are saying. It was very interesting. The whole Zappos ethos was about customer service is not so much about fixing a problem, but of course fixing a problem, but also creating an emotional connection with the customer. And a big part of this was this friendly customer service agent, kind of making small talk with you and not putting you on hold and all that. But what we discovered was a true insight. This was the icing on the cake. The actual two little elements that are, I mean, they're little, but they actually have enormous impact, very simple, are two things that the customer service agent says up front. One is, "I'm sorry." And two is basically, "I'll fix it for you." The "I'm sorry" is basically, don't pass the buck. So maybe UPS were late, whatever. No Zappos customer service agent says, "Oh, you know what, it's UPS's fault, go." I'm sorry, right? It's these two things. "I'm sorry, I'll fix it for you." Beyond that, you know what I mean? It sounds very simple, but I think it's pretty profound.
And do you think that fundamental understanding of acknowledgement, which is, acknowledging that, something has happened regardless of whatever the excuse is, and saying you're sorry, there's not too many brands that do that. I know Zappos gives free returns and is famous for the returns as well. So it's having the culture to support that idea as well is really key. What have you seen internally, Alex, from Zappos that supports that, when people are saying, "Okay, we've got an okay NPS score, we're an insurance company, we don't really need to do anything spectacular"? What would your answer be to that, to kind of convince the executives to rethink this?
Yeah, great question. I mean, if you're for example in a business that's a monopoly, let's be honest, like if your customers are stuck with you, you don't have to worry about that in a way, right? But if your customers have a choice, and if you have leadership that really wants to create long-term, lifelong customers, then you have to worry about how they feel. And an NPS, again, imperfect, you can argue about the validity and all that stuff, but NPS is a number that is focusing the company to say, "I care about how my customers feel." And then also within, if you let them tell you what they're experiencing with the text field, then you're going to find the root causes in that text. But that's the challenge, is many companies don't understand how difficult it is to figure out the root cause. And that's why you need AI like Adoreboard, and there's other companies out there, but we're of course we're hosted by you guys, and I really believe in what you're doing. That's why you need this technology to crack those root causes.
Superb. And just have been informed by my colleagues, we have selected our first winner of the book. So Dan, we're going to make sure a book goes straight to your home address, so we'll be in contact with yourself, and also Karen. They're the two names that got pulled out of the hat. So we'll be given the further rate over the coming days, so please bear with us as well. So, and also as we're reaching out just to confirm the 3 insights, bear with us. There's quite a few that we're working through. So just really to conclude, just final thoughts, just as we go around the group, and then we'll close it for today. We'll be giving a recording of today's session and a number of other key takeaways as well. So Fernando, key takeaway or key idea for people to think about in the coming days?
Key takeaway for me is you have to take action on the numbers. Like once you get the numbers, you have to dig deeper and then look into the actual person, as we've said all along. Like look into the emotion, look into the actual like issue, not just what the number is saying, and then create something, build something that will address that concern, or if it's positive emotion, like we'll address that too. Like build upon that that data that you're getting. Like the data in itself doesn't make a difference, right? So that's my key takeaway.
Superb. James, in terms of the business value of segmentation, moving the business forward, what's your key takeaway? Just
really let the customers tell you what your business should be doing. Don't go into the research with these preconceived ideas of who your customer is. Just really be open-minded. Let the data tell you who your right customer is. Superb. Let the data tell the story. I love that. Okay, Alex, you can take it away. Close today's session. Key idea, key takeaway, and we'll then thank everyone who's joined us today.
Sure, we talked about ideas. I just want to bring it back to James and Fernando, and I mean they're super modest, and I think from what they were saying, I hope the audience, I don't know if they realized what amazing know-how is right, what they're holding in a sense. So I mean James he does the rocket science part, right? You can think that what we talked about is this fluffy, feeling, touchy-feely kind of stuff. Some of it's art and science. James holds the key to the hardcore science, which everything is built upon. There's no one or the other, right? It's not science or art. It's a blend of both. And James, of course, we didn't have time, but he's this, I mean, genius to me that goes into the numbers and then makes sense of this enormous data sets. And then Fernando is the person who then takes that and can create what I consider magic. Really, it's the creativity and the art part. I think when you bring those together, then you're gonna make a lot of money. Let's put it this way.
And I think that's a great way to conclude, because we're bringing it back to purpose and how those things combine. So all I have to do is to thank everyone for their generosity in terms of taking time out of their diary. The feedback has been amazing. Like the Q&A has been lit up. Mr. Reed, really lovely what you said there, Alex, being humble, being acknowledge our customer concerns. Alex, where did you get the jacket is one comment. Barbara, so refreshing to hear collective wisdom. I'm grateful intuitively, if known that sentiment you're saying what about emotion is true. Bringing it back to the business values as well. So look, thank you so much. You'll get a recording. Look out for the lucky call for this special book. It's the experience in this book in terms of the visuals is outstanding. The actual paper quality takes me on a magical experience as well. And as I say, 3 legends from the customer experience joined us today. So thank you so much, and we'll be chatting soon. Thanks again, everyone. Take care. Cheers.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.